East Dundee's Board of Trustees regular meeting dated Monday, March 6, 2023 at 6 o'clock. Catherine, will you take the roll?
Trustee Britton?
Here.
Trustee Saviano will not be here. Trustee Triber?
Here.
Trustee Sauter?
Here.
Trustee Mahoney?
Here.
Trustee Coonsey?
Present.
And President Lineham.
Here. And if you'll join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, that'll take us to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the board on an agenda or a non-agenda item?
We have Nancy Wilson.
Okay.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing us to speak to you. My name is Nancy Wilson. I live at 424 Maxwell Road in East Dundee, and here tonight because of our interest in the Gypsy Moth proposal. And I'd like to allocate my 5 minutes of speaking time to my husband, Maurice. Thank you.
He brings up the good day. Thank you. Maurice Martin and Nancy Wilson, 424 Maxwell Road, and we live in the Lakewood Estates area, and it's one of two large infestations in the village. And we've been residents for over 30 years, and you may remember that you got an email from a guy who told you about his engineered gravel driveway in October when you were receiving comments about that. Well, that was us, just so you know who we are. Hopefully we left a good impression with you, and we will again tonight. I'd like to talk about the gypsy moths and talk about a first person's experience being at ground zero. We have the distinction of being, our property is where one of the traps that received 38 of the moths, and there's somebody else in the terrace that had 38 moths in their trap as well. But I have to relate to you that in one 15-minute period, I watched 3 moths fly out of the trap. And that was just in a 15-minute period. So I'm suspecting that the outbreak is much larger than the trap counts show. But it is an infestation, whether it's 38 moths or whatever. Thank you also for your efforts up until today. We contacted certain trustees and the Director of Public Works last June 20th when we were aware of our outbreak and shared these exact pictures with a few of it at the time. We didn't go to the whole village because we thought if we let Trustee Mahoney know, who was in our neighborhood, and you, Mr. Lyman, and I think Erica, we let know, and maybe a couple of other people, that at the time that was sufficient. And it did get the ball rolling. Phil was at our house the next day, and we had a couple of neighbors there, and we met with him. We've seen the news articles, we've seen the Depot News, we've seen things on your website. We know he's been active with working with the state and with our neighborhood group and keeping us all informed. So we're very pleased with everything that has taken place until today. And when I say we, I'm speaking for my wife and I, but I think generally that's what's going on. I would like to ask you to approve the process, the proposal for aerial spraying, either option that you deem is appropriate. Substantial acreage needs to be sprayed, and you've got a couple of proposals for that. I don't have all the facts. I have the facts as I see them from my property only. We do feel that you are primarily responsible, the village board and the village, to get this under control for us. We feel that we have a shared responsibility, certainly, and we'll go through a little bit of that. These trees are part of the character of this beautiful village. They're a reason that a lot of people come, though a few are on my property. They can't be replaced. And as hard as we tried, we could not fix this. So there's a website called Slow the Spread, excuse me, and it's a national website, and it talks about, this is a little bit of our yard. We have over 20 oaks, and they talk about wrapping them with burlap. That's a first step, because the gypsy moths do come down, some of them, every day when they get too hot or other reasons. And when they come in contact with the burlap, which has a flap, they can't climb back up on the tree. Now, that's an infestation. That's one day on one tree on one portion. And if I, lifted all that burlap, you'd see. So we cleaned hundreds of these critters from each tree every day for about 6 weeks. It's really pretty terrible and pretty gross. We also, on our own, don't think there's a picture of it here. We found that if we put a granulated insecticide on the ground, that some who walked off the tree came in contact with the insecticide. So anyway, you're really not seeing the full impact of this all. And I do, will gladly share these pictures with you in a handout when I'm finished. The result of this, even though we got on it early and got on it fast, this is what happens. There's a similar picture, but I thought you'd appreciate seeing one right in our own neighborhood. These little critters will eat a lot of leaves. It's been talked about being 11 square feet and everything, but they spit as much out. If this is what litters your ground, your grass, and everywhere underneath the tree. So a lot of the foliage that doesn't get eaten is just destroyed because they don't start at one corner and eat like you might on a plate. They start wherever they are and the leaf comes falling off. All this is pretty bad, but what's even worse is they defecate. And when there are those great numbers of gypsy moths up in a tree, you can't go out on your patio if there's a tree near the house. You hear it falling, you see it, you have to clean it up every day. It's the size of granules like on your shingles. And others here will tell you that it just was like living in a nightmare for that time. But every day we spent an hour and a half going over our trees and scraping all these guys off and killing them. So that's what we did from June till the end of July. When September came, the females that were fertilized, and the females walk, so they're kind of lazy. The males will fly around and impregnate or fertilize them, but the females walk, and they lay these egg masses, and each one of those masses has 600 to 1,000 eggs in it. This is 1 square foot of one tree, and there's about 20 egg masses there. Do the math. That one tree, and guess what? It's not even an oak tree. This is an evergreen tree that's several hundred feet from any of my oaks. So you can't, it's just impossible to find it all. They were on my car tires, they were on my garbage can, and this little bugger is on my mailbox. So it is even to try to get at the egg masses if you can. Some are high, you can't get in the trees and all that sort of stuff, but just to mitigate it, what would a property owner's responsibility be? Well, we bought the burlap, right? We attended to the trees every single day. We put the granulated stuff at the bottom. We are picking our egg masses off as we can. And we also had our trees root fertilized because as the trees, their capability to do everything is diminished, we were told that the fertilizer would help them recover this year. That was $850. We have $300 in the burlap and everything, and countless hours of effort. So I feel pretty strongly that that's about what the village can expect from someone. Now, we slowed it. We followed every procedure possible, but look at the egg masses. What are we going to face next year? This all happened, in case everyone doesn't know this, in 1889, a guy in Massachusetts was trying to make a better silkworm, stronger silkworm. So he brought this gypsy moth variety in from Eurasia, and some of them got away. And so in 1889 in Medford, Massachusetts was the first defoliation in a neighborhood. And they've been working their way west and north ever since. But throughout this long journey, a top-down infrastructure involving the National Forest Service, federal and state departments of agriculture has been in place to manage the gypsy moth thing. We were told by Nancy Johnson at the Illinois Department of Agriculture that the state is treating routinely by aerial spray up as far as Rockford or down as far as Roxford. They consider that the front. Other places they consider outliers, and they're not taking full responsibility for that now, and that may have been, I learned some of this from Phil, what's going on with our town. 2 years ago, Compton Hills near St. Charles basically had what we had, and they engaged the flying service as a community to get theirs back under control. I think we're just another outlier. The top-down process involves several stages: awareness, monitor, track, and lastly, act. And certainly, the village has been aware for a while. It wasn't time to act, but been following this. The state's been aware. And then in 2021, we started to see a few. But, you know, nature often, mice like them, blue jays like them. There are viruses and fungus that like them, but not when the numbers are so high. And I think that's what we had in 2021. It just went crazy. 2022 is going to be crazy even in our yard. We will start to see frail trees will start to die. Healthy trees, 3 years out, you know, we're probably good. It's terrible to let it go that long, but I think that that's what we face. We do recommend the aerial treatment, substantial acreage with BTK, the approved biologic, following the established protocols. And I thank you very much. I have copies of my notes if you would like them.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, any questions?
No, well, I'm sure there will be some. Okay, do we have anybody else who would like to address the board?
Mike Montag?
Montague?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's good.
I'm Mike Montague, live at 509 Wexwelton. It occurred to me that no one really looked at or started to talk about the village ordinances for this yet. And there already is village ordinances for unhealthy trees and trees that are injured and have harbors insects and diseases. And the village has to do something about that. So if we just drove around on our way here, and there's 30 oak trees on the outside of our property on the right of way. So if every one of those trees died due to this, the village has to cut down 30 oak trees.
Even if it's on private residential property?
No, this is the right of way.
Oh, this is
is
right.
just
Oh,
the
this is
right
just
of
the
way.
right. Oh my
On
God!
our
And then the
property,
rest of the
there's
yard.
30 oak trees.
Yeah.
On the right of way.
Okay.
So at what, $2,000 a tree? Right there, you already have $60,000.
That's cheap. I want to know who that guy is.
Yeah, exactly. right there is $60,000, which is less than this,
Right.
which would hopefully remediate the problem. That's all I have. Oh, and these don't just attack oaks. It attacks birches, elm, maples, and other hardwoods. So if it does get to be bad enough, it will start to go after other trees
Whatever
in the
it can.
area, and that would be even worse. But, that's
Okay,
all.
thanks. Good. Thank you.
Patience Eckler?
I live at 509 Maxwellton also. I'm going to leave the technical aspect to them. We moved out here 10 years ago, 12 years ago? 12 years ago, either way. But we moved out here for the beauty, the trees, the river, everything. And like Maurice and Nancy, it was unbelievable, the moss. We spend a lot of time working on our property. Ourselves, we do all the work. We cut the trees, we trim the trees. It was unbelievable when the moth, the caterpillar turned to a moth. You couldn't even go outside. We watched our leaves and our trees falling apart. So I just want to remind all of us from all the technical, I don't even know what some of that was said, but I hope we can fix it. But I would hate to lose the village that we live in with the trees and the beauty of it all. I mean, I don't want to move to Gilbert's and live with no trees. We moved here because you guys have been here a lot longer than I have, some of you. We love it here. We love the trees. We like the people. It's just we want to keep that classic community. And if that's what it's going to take is some help from the village, I mean, we're in. We really need some help because it was unbelievable just trying to even spend a minute outside when those moths came last year. I mean, not a few, talking hundreds of thousands of them. So please help. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you.
Peggy Veltri.
Good evening. My name is Peggy Veltri. My husband Joe and I, we live at 602 Greenwood in East Dundee. And I want to thank you all for having this on the agenda tonight and listening to what we have to say and to what Phil has proposed to help save our neighborhood. Trees die. It's a part of life, and over time, it's part of what usually happens. So we shouldn't get overly excited about the problems posed by these pesky gypsy moths, right? Or maybe we should. Because what they promise to do is not in the usual life cycle of a tree. You see, all the trees in the neighborhood don't usually get attacked at one time. And following the devastation of trees in that one neighborhood, it's not really usual for all the trees in a town to get attacked over a relatively short period of time and to suffer that same fate. That's just not usual. But the gypsy moth infestation has presented us with an unusual problem. They threaten the lives of our most majestic and beneficial oaks, the same grand oaks that help stem the flow of excessive runoff after strong storms like the ones we've been seeing more and more often in recent years. These gypsy moths threaten what these hardworking oaks do to keep our air clean and breathable, the work it would take 20 smaller trees to do. And over time, these moths will threaten all the trees that help define the personality of our village, the personality of small town charm and of real community. And although the death of these grand trees is sad, is it really the concern of the whole village of East Dundee? I believe that it absolutely is. Because once these old soldiers are lost, the gypsy moths will move on and spread throughout the entire village and well beyond. Though they prefer oaks, they'll gladly munch on and ultimately destroy the rest of the trees that give our town so much of its character and personality. They'll take your pine, they'll take her maple, and maybe someone's fruit tree that maybe was planted to commemorate the birth of a child or the death of a loved one. The destruction brought on by the gypsy moths will spread like a virus. And like a virus, we have the power to stop it now before the damage that can't be undone is unleashed. Our trees are part of the natural infrastructure of our village. They act as nature's air conditioner by moderating temperatures. They act as air purifiers by taking thousands and thousands of pounds of carbon out of our air each year, making breathing easier for so many of us. They serve as retaining walls against the damages of rainwater. And as a bonus, they support our good mental health, make us feel good. So yes, they are part of our infrastructure, and we all have had experiences with increased cost of dealing with neglect of the infrastructure when investments in it have been put off for too long. A $40,000 or $50,000 problem today can be multiplied many times over if it's put off and the real damage of tree loss is allowed to begin. So I wholeheartedly ask the board to please approve the proposal to employ aerial spraying to support our trees, to protect our natural infrastructure, and to preserve the character and value of our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe
Anybody
Veltri.
else?
My name is Joe Beltry. I'm going to start by saying I'm not a tree hugger. However, I do appreciate what trees do for us. At a time when the world is concerned with CO2 and global warming, saving trees is important. Now, we all know about trees and photosynthesis. One large oak can annually supply enough oxygen for 10 people. And that same mature tree can absorb up to 100 pounds of CO2. That means the trees in my yard and yours don't just benefit our households, they benefit the whole community. Just in case you're thinking, we'll just plant another tree. If you let these mature trees die, then it would take 20 saplings to replace the CO2 benefit of losing one mature oak. And East Dundee is not talking about losing one tree. East Dundee has over 2,000 acres of trees, and hundreds of those acres are currently being threatened. And that number will grow exponentially if we don't. Now, maybe you didn't see any spongy moss on your property last year. We didn't 2 years ago. Maybe your yard, you don't have any oak trees. But according to Morton Arboretum, the spongy moth is not a picky eater. Those spongy moths are fir oaks. They will devour almost any leafy green tree, including alder, apple, birch, hawthorn, evergreen trees. And when those are gone, they'll eat maples, sycamores, elms, dogwoods, etc. Now, per the Department of Agriculture, during large outbreaks, trees can be entirely stripped of their leaves within days, as was the case on Mr. Martin's yard. And trees that lose their foliage 2 consecutive years are susceptible to disease and are likely to die. So you may believe this is a property owner's issue. If it was, the state of Illinois Department of Agriculture wouldn't have put counties under quarantine, such as King County. Last year, we had 2 tree companies come and inspect our property. They told me there was no effective treatment for available to tree services, that only aerial spraying is effective. Now, they did suggest that we fertilize our trees to give them a boost, and we did. One arborist scraped off an egg mass and told me that they are capable of surviving temperatures to -22, so winter doesn't kill them. And also told me that one moth can lay up to 1,000 eggs in a mass. He said a single spongy caterpillar can consume 11 square feet of vegetation. That means the larva from just one egg mass laid by one caterpillar can consume 11,000 square foot of foliage. To give you a visual, that's the equivalent of 4 tennis courts for a quarter of an acre. Let me repeat that. The damage caused by the larva of just one spongy moth can destroy the area of leaves equal to a quarter of an acre. But we're not talking about one moth. We're talking about up to 1 million caterpillars per acre, according to the Cornell Extension Service. Last year, we scraped hundreds of eggs masses off our trees. Not just oaks, but maples, locusts, hickories, and evergreens, plus our patio furniture in our house. We know we didn't get them all, and we also know that there's thousands of trees in the neighborhood, yards, parks, and public areas that were also affected. According to both the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Illinois Department of Agriculture, the control measure for affected sites in Illinois is treatment in one of 2 ways, with a pheromone or with a bacteria called BTK. Both applications can only be applied either by helicopter or airplane. Therefore, the U.S. government and Illinois say this is not a problem that can be solved by individual property owners. We will continue to invest in our trees. But there is only so much we can do from the ground. We need the village to commit to effective aerial treatment to benefit the entire community. Now, if nothing I've said so far has moved you, let me conclude by reading an excerpt from a study that was done by the Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service. They said, during outbreaks, when gypsy moth populations increase rapidly, caterpillars pose a hazard to human health. Defoliation caused by caterpillars feeding reduces the vigor and health of forest and shade trees, leads to tree death, alters wildlife habitats, changes the quality and quantity of water, and lowers property values. I urge you to act. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's all we have? Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to our consent agenda. could have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda items. A, motion to approve regular village board meeting minutes dated February 6, 2023. Motion to accept the warrants list in the amount of $149,371.16, and to approve a resolution in support of tax increment financing.
Second.
Does anybody have any questions or changes they'd like to make, or? No? Kathy?
Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
Trustee Coonsey?
Yes.
Okay, that'll take us to our regular agenda items. We've got item A, if we could have a motion.
I'll move to approve an ordinance, a special use permit for crushing and recycling of concrete and asphalt and the resale of the material for a portion of the property located at 590 Healy Road, East Dundee, Illinois 60118, portion of PIN number 01-30-300-009-0000, located in the M1 Manufacturing District.
Second.
Does anybody have any questions?
Erica, can
do
you
have
start us off on this?
Do we need a second?
We have a
Can we get a second?
Second.
Oh, is the applicant here?
The applicant is here, yes. So this issue has gone through the Planning and Zoning Commission. It has been put forward for you to review, and again, as in previous meetings, we've put forward a staff recommendation and then also a PZHC recommendation. If the board is moving forward with approving it, we would recommend that the staff's version go through along with any additional changes that you may deem necessary. And the applicant is here to answer any questions. There's also been a handout supplied by the building inspector about what type of fencing will be utilized on which side of the building.
It'd be on Hines Road.
On Hines Road, okay.
The future line.
Okay.
I had a question. Well, for the hours of operation, on the packet, it says 6 to 4. Okay. I guess I'm confused because there's two different ordinances in here.
Yes, so PZHC recommended.
There's two different times in each ordinance then, right? One is 7 to 4 Monday through Friday and 7 to 3 on Saturday, and the other is 7 to 4 Monday through Saturday. Is that correct?
Correct.
What level of noise does this output?
I'm sorry?
What level of noise does this output?
It's equivalent to like a diesel engine operating when we're in production, and we'll have an excavator and a front end loader operating at that same time. I'm trying to think of a good example to provide, but with the screening and with the walls up that we have during normal business hours, it's not extreme by any means. It's really not. For an open air area, it's really not that noisy.
Okay. My other question for you is 7 to 4, is that what you guys provided? Is that, you're comfortable with that?
It is. I mean, we'll probably have personnel, showing up around 6:30. There might be some earlier loads, but I would say 6:30 to 4 is going to be standard operating hours for us.
Okay.
So you're already doing this, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you received complaints about the noise?
Not one that I can recall.
Have we received complaints about the noise?
Yes.
Yes, we have.
From who?
We've received complaints from Barrington residents about the dust and the noise.
I'm also a little curious as to why, and you know that what you were doing out there was not approved by the village. You know A-Lamp has been around for a long time doing this exact same activity in a number of different communities. You know you would have had to gotten permission to do it here, but you didn't. And when you first came to us and that was made aware, you were made aware of it, You chose to ignore it, you know? And I mean, you just kept on doing it for a couple of years now. And why we didn't hammer you right out of the gate is a failing on our part. But, you know, you come here and, you know, I just see you as a bad actor, you know? And I'm struggling with this.
I do apologize that you're feeling that way. You know, to some extent, I'm coming in on this particular item a little later in the game. There's been a lot of parties involved. I think that from day one, all of the representation from our end was working with good faith with some of the other parties involved at the village, whether that be public works, attorneys, things of that nature. I think from the get-go, we've been pretty forthcoming on what our agenda has been from the get-go with developing that property. So I do apologize that you're feeling that way, but we are really coming into this to be a good player. We're trying to be a good partner with the village here, and I think we've been working pretty well with the folks to try to get to this point.
So the fence is an effort for noise reduction or dust reduction, or?
I think it's for from an aesthetic standpoint.
Okay.
I think that there'll be some noise reduction qualities of it, but I think that's going to be the main focus there.
Where does the grinding occur? Is it at ground level or is
It is at ground level, yes.
And this fence is for the south side of the property. What's proposed on the east and west?
We have the concrete blocks with a fence on top with some additional screening.
And then additional landscaping to help capture some of that dust?
Correct. And that was proposed, I think, based on our conversations with planning along the south end and along the west side of the property as well.
But not the east where the complaints are coming
The
from?
east has some natural screening already with some embankments. There's a berm already established there, and we have some concrete blocks as well to provide some additional screening. And then the north portion of the site will be facing proposed parking areas.
Concrete blocks to provide screening of what?
Really just the visual, yes, exactly.
The big piles of grindings.
Yeah, no, I know. But if I'm one of those Barrington people looking at a wall of concrete blocks, I wouldn't exactly call that aesthetically pleasing.
Can
I speak to that?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Steve Kaminsky. I'm the civil engineer for 590 Healy. And so if you recall, actually, if I may, my board out. I think this will help do a visual here. If I get the right side up. So to the north of the site is not those Barrington residents. There's the entire large auto auction site that's in between us. And so the way our use and the way the crushing proposed operation is in this portion of the site. To the north, the portion of the site is truck parking, which has been previously discussed and approved as a special use. Along Healy here, not only are those block walls there, but there's a very significant amount of mature vegetation that really obscures even the view of those block walls from the Healy side. So we've got proposed screening on the Hines side that consists of the decorative wall. We've got existing screening that consists of the block walls and the existing vegetation on the east side. To the north, we're buffered from any neighboring residents by the large auto auction sites and our other truck parking use. And then to the west side, that's where you're proposing block wall fence, but then some landscaping on the outside of it. But that's really only an oblique view for folks that are driving on Hines. So I hope that kind of describes the elements a little bit better. To address the complaints that have been previously received about dust, part of that is that we haven't had the final dust suppression system installed yet, simply because we're going through this entitlement process. And so there is going to be an irrigation system that's operated that puts sprayers on the processing and the crushing operation during the whole time it's in operation, in order to make sure that all that dust is captured in the water particles and drops right back down on the operation.
How much of the dust do you think that'll contain?
As long as we operate it during the crushing operation, well, quite frankly, some of your other mining neighbors are going to make a lot more. I mean, the regional dust is from our perspective, or from our site, is going to be a drop in the bucket compared to some of the other uses that are going on around us.
The difference being that those operations are on unincorporated Kane County, not East Dundee, so we wouldn't have a say in that regardless.
Yeah, and I was just trying to answer the question about relative impacts.
I have a question concerning the tax revenue coming off of the resale of the crushed product. There's been some question as to whether or not all that's going to Schaumburg operation, but you're doing it here. You're
Right.
making the noise, you're making the dust, and you're taking the product there and the tax revenue with it.
We've had some recent conversations with Cook County, specifically regarding that, and I think it might be due to some inquiries that have been made. And we're in the process, and I believe have completed that. I'm happy to follow up with getting the proper allocation set up on our end so that those dollars are actually channeling to East Dundee.
So what does that allocation consist of?
It was setting up an account, or there was something through the county that we needed to get set up so that when we report, those tax dollars were heading to East Dundee as they should.
I think he was asking, what's your estimate on what that will be?
I don't have a good figure that I could provide you today, Mr. Lyman, unfortunately.
Well, I don't want to be difficult or anything. I'm just wondering why there's any allocation at all. I mean, if the operation is being done here in East Dundee and the tax revenue is generated from operations here in East Dundee, why isn't it staying in East Dundee? Why is any of it going to Schaumburg?
It shouldn't. I mean, I agree it should. I mean, it really should. I mean, that's part of our partnership together as a business operating in East Dundee. You should be receiving those revenues, those tax revenues. I totally agree. And we're taking steps to make sure that that's happening.
Yeah, and that's outlined in the packet as one of the staff recommendations. So if we go with these staff recommendations, that would be covered. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I would be happy to follow up with the information regarding that with Cook County to kind of show what's been established to your point.
Well, Cook County's got a hell of a lot more clot than East Dundee does, so if they get their hands in it first, we're going to be left high and dry. So, what's the safeguard for East Dundee? That's my main concern.
No, sure, Mr. Lyman, and I
That's
think
my only concern.
And I think that was part of the reason why they contacted us, was specifically so that we had the right accounts or how we report in place so that those dollars were channeling to you folks properly.
Okay, well,
I had a question.
sure.
With regards to your irrigation system, right now you've got 2 retention ponds on there. Is that what the source of water is going to be?
Yes, that's correct.
And what happens when the water goes away? What will the source be? There's dry times and there's wet times. I walk around a retention pond, every week.
Sure, that's my job.
Great.
As a civil engineer and hydrologist, we size what we call the dead storage pool, the level below the outlet pipe elevation of the pond, to be large enough to be at least 50% more than a typical dry season deficit.
Okay.
Give you, so that you're essentially not running out.
Okay, so
If you had to, we could always, if it was an extraordinary thing, we could always rent the hydrant meter and refill from there.
Correct.
Because part of the overall improvements is to extend
Right.
city water down Hines Road.
Right. Okay. Then the other thing is you've got trucks coming in and out of here right now, not only for the grinding operation, but you also have it for the truck parking as
Correct.
well. So what kind of maintenance are you going to be doing on Healy Road to control the dust? And yes, across the street, we have the same issue, and it's one of those things we always have to monitor. And
Yeah,
but
so
what's your commitment?
We have water tanks on trailers and water trucks that we'll have at our disposal as well as mechanical sweepers that we have in our fleet.
Okay.
So we would manage the dust on the roadways with those items.
All right, sounds good.
And for what it's worth, gypsy moths don't eat recycled asphalt or concrete.
Well, we wish they
Not
would.
a food source.
So I guess my question is then, why are we giving this 6-month waiting period? Is there a reason why you guys can't implement this irrigation system immediately?
We're still in the process of grading the north site. So once we get to that point and we can start establishing the block wall, we're just going to continue the process. So I think we've got a 6-month delay or timeline established based on the previous meetings, but our intention is to just move that forward as soon as we're in a position to do so.
So, but you're gonna continue grinding in that 6-month period?
Correct, and as we have in the past and have been up to this point, we have, like I was mentioning just prior, water trucks available for dust suppression and other means, other than an irrigation system that's in there permanently to do so.
Is there no means to muffle some of the sound? From an engineering standpoint, is there a method to do that?
In terms of the sounds and the frequency, the grinding is a relatively low frequency noise. The operation, quite honestly, the loudest part of the operation will be the backup alarms and the loaders probably, which is an OSHA requirement. We can't not do that. That's probably the most penetrating sound would be the loader backups. If the beep, beep, if you've heard that before, that's probably what's most audibly noticeable.
So,
But to that regard, maybe what I should comment is the crushing operation, and I can't remember if we've mentioned that in this board before or the PZA, but that's not a continuous operation. The way crushing works is the material accumulates until you reach a certain inventory point, at which point the portable crusher is mobilized to the site. So crushing is not something that happens, starts up at 7 a.m. and goes through to 4 p.m. every day. It's more, what would you describe the cycle as?
Like currently, right, there hasn't been any processing that's occurred at all this season. We're to Steve's point, we're in the process of accumulating what they call a raw feed, and then once that gets to a certain level, we'll process that. So I mean, maybe 30% of the month we would be processing, whereas the remainder would be, maybe even if it's a 60-40 split, where the rest of it is more of us just loading out than we are actually processing. And those, there is some fluctuation there, but I would say on average.
Well, I would recommend that we go ahead and, if the board decides they want to do this, frankly, on its face, I would encourage you or urge you to deny it. However, if the board is in favor of doing this, I would suggest that we put a time limit on this one, a temporary sunset clause of 2 years to find out whether or not the revenue coming off of this operation is going to pay for itself. The monies that are coming off of this operation are likely to have to go to the upkeep and maintenance of the roads, Healy, not to mention Hines. All that is the responsibility of the village. So when those trucks tear up Hines Road, and when those trucks tear up Healy Road, we're going to get the call to fix them. We're going to rely on the revenue coming in off the operations that tear up those roads to pay for it. We don't know what that money is, and until we know, I don't think we should vote for this, guys. We need to have some idea, because what you're doing is you're combining the revenue that's coming in off of East Dundee and Schaumburg, jamming it all together and hoping that it passes. You guys haven't shown us anything that would make me comfortable that is going to show that East Dundee is going to get anything, much less its fair allocation of this revenue. At the same time, everything below grade is us. And I'm not comfortable approving this kind of thing without having an assurance that the money that's going to be needed to pay for it is coming in.
I still had another question.
Sure.
There isn't, so I was just looking at the zoning map to try and better understand what the civil engineer was talking about and how actually close that is. And yes, there is another property buffering, which is the auto company. It's only about half the depth, and then you're right up against residential property. Mm-hmm. So like, I'm sorry, Chris, to put you on the spot, but oh, Joe's here too. You know, when you look at the auto property size of the lot and the depth of the lot, that is buffering between the grinding and the single family, very large properties, and I imagine very much invested into properties. How far is that, and what kind of actual buffer really? I don't think there is any kind of buffer over in the auto area that would help mitigate dust.
Why had to provide a buffer?
Oh, they did.
Yeah, there was required just a visual one,
Mhm.
some of dust,
Mhm.
a visual.
And they're also not on paved. Their area isn't
They're on
paved.
grindings, so-
They're on grindings.
So that in of itself is gonna make dust.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, for the truck parking, but
Yeah, these homes are surrounded by gravel all around it. These being
Right.
like the very south part, but the nation's largest gravel parking lot is all around them, so they're probably going to get dust. I mean, we still need sprayers that need to control dust, but maybe across other properties as well, looking at ways to spray dust.
I think one other thing that would need to be stipulated in any agreement that goes forth would be what role or what likelihood East Dundee would have to increase the amount of tax coming off of this operation over time. So in the event that, I mean, if this agreement passes on its face and it locks us into a certain amount of revenue coming in, I want to make sure that as time goes on, we have the ability to increase the tax from it. Because the costs to maintain those roads, as I said, is always going to continue to go up. So I want to make sure that
Well, we have home rule.
revenue follows.
Wouldn't some of our home rule
I
be
don't
able to
know.
apply to that?
Possibly, but I'm not
We're
sure
not
because
setting,
I don't know.
we're not
what
setting
the
the tax rate inside
I-
the special
Right.
use.
It's-
And I
Okay.
don't
'Cause
know
it's
what
just
the
sales tax.
relationship is between East Dundee and Schaumburg or Cook County. And so what I don't want to do is cross swords with any of those other government units because we're likely to lose. So these are my concerns, so.
Legally, if we set a 2-year sunset on this, are we setting ourselves up for exposure legally, or?
well,
A special use is a form of an allowed use with conditions, and it requires board approval for a reason, because it impacts the community in a greater way. So it's not unheard of to have a sunset clause or a review period that the board, this will be up for review or renewal in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's typically more of what you see, and then the board at that time, if they decided the impact was too great or needed extra conditions or just shouldn't be reapproved, could decide not to approve it again.
could we make it for 1 year?
You can make it for anything you'd like.
It's a safety net.
Okay.
Because wait, we're seeing the irrigation system is estimated to
18
be
months.
within 6 months, so this summer
I think it was 6 months from
approval.
approval, yeah.
I'd prefer a review period.
Mm-hmm. I would too.
So it would be an expiration in a year with an option to renew the special use permit
For an additional year.
for however long you decide.
Yeah.
Okay, so who made the motion?
I did.
Would you like to amend it?
So, I guess I have to amend it and say, first off, we're going to use the ordinance with the staff recommendations.
Yes.
Second, we're going to add a 1-year expiration with the option to renew. And I guess that's it, yeah.
So the motion is to adopt the staff recommendations with a 1-year expiration with option to renew. Is there a second? Sorry, is there a second to this?
Second. Do we have to adopt any sort of assurances with regard to the tax revenue coming off the operation?
So I provided that in there.
Yeah, that's in the back.
I added a condition that, to the extent provided by law, they would pay the sales tax.
Right.
So,
There's other-
I'm sorry, trustee was a
Second.
second? Okay, so can do a roll call on the amendment. Well, I think the motion was to adopt the ordinance as amended, so we'll just do it that way.
So does that count as a amended motion, that we have to approve the motion and then?
Your motion was to amend and adopt the ordinance as amended, right?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll do it that way.
Okay. Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
Trustee Coonsey?
Yes.
Oh, and Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So he's taking care of it, correct?
So we'll make a
Now
motion.
we don't have to go vote on it, we just make a motion to amend. We need a motion to amend this, that's it. Got it. Good enough. Okay, I just hope we don't lose. Okay, well, that'll take us to item B, if we could have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve an ordinance amending Chapter 116 of the Village of East Dundee Village Code to amend the Class F liquor license to allow for a current liquor licensee to exceed its classification of liquor license for 1 day and for the retail sale of spirits in its original package at a special event.
Second.
Holy smokes.
This is the other one.
So this is for Italian Fest?
Yes.
Right.
Is Italian
Is it
Fest
right here?
1 day?
It's was it a weekend?
Or was it 2 days?
1 day.
It was a 1 day. 1 day on a Saturday.
I know, I'm very excited about the
Really?
eating contest.
Where have I been?
So was there any questions on this one? We had the petitioner come in and present what they were hoping to do, and
Yeah, I will say that I went to Aliano's and they actually have the bottles there, and I know there was some concern about, the packaging and everything. It very much looks like almost a wine bottle with the seal at the top and everything, so it's a lot less open than I had visualized, so. And plus, it's gonna be served warm. Yeah, so.
okay, was there any questions or anything? Discussion? No? Catherine?
Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
And Trustee Coonsey?
Yes.
Okay, that takes us to item C, which is a 2022 Police Department activity presentation. Chief, the floor is yours.
Those gypsy months are everywhere, man.
Can't get away from it.
All right.
Here we go. Thank you very much. The village administrator asked me to provide to you our activity levels for 2022. I should say that, of course, for this meeting and for appreciation of your time, it's going to be a little high level, but certainly I can answer any questions you have. And I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks, our annual report will be to press, and so that way you can dive into the numbers a little more should you wish, or get a little more explanation of what we're doing and what we've been doing. So we're just going to go over some of the activity. We're going to talk about calls for service, our Part 1 and Part 2 offenses. Part 1 is those major felonies that are reported to the state and to the FBI. The Part 2 offenses are the more lower level misdemeanor offenses that occur. Our service calls and false alarms that we respond to, a little bit about traffic crashes, our traffic enforcement numbers, DUI arrest, and I'm just going to mention the major incidents, but I think everybody's kind of familiar with some of the things that have hit the newspapers, but just taking a look at that on what's taken up some of our time. So first, our calls for service. As you can see, I think there's been a dramatic increase in calls for service this year over last year. This is the 3-year comparison. As you can see, we're just under 5,000 calls for service. That puts us actually above West Dundee, and I'm going to kind of show some comparison data and some workload analysis just to put some framework around it on what that looks like, on what our people do with the staffing that we have as compared to maybe some of our, yes?
Just a question, going back further since 2020 and 2021, a lot of our local dining and bar establishments were closed. Is this similar to, are we climbing back to normal, or are we climbing beyond where we were
Well, it's kind of
in 2019, 2018?
Thank you. It's kind of a two-part answer because unfortunately Quadcom has changed the way that they do numbers basically around 2019. In other words, they don't pull numbers for every ambulance call, even though you'll see where that actually changes things, because what they did is there was a change in the CAD system to events and then calls for service or report numbers. So everything gets an event, because everything is an event, regardless of what type of incident it is, but then the calls for service are actual incidents that are reported to the police get this number.
Respond.
So I could take this number and then add a bunch of those other things together to get to what the new number is, but it gets pretty convoluted at that point on what's counted, what's not counted. And that's why I wanted to give you a 3-year depiction, because really, especially when you take a look at it in comparison to our neighbors, that's how, helps put some framework around it. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything by itself necessarily without some reference.
So Chief, our counts on, compared to West Dundee, is that just a bottom line whole count that we exceed West Dundee, or is that on like a per capita basis?
No, this is the actual number.
Actual count.
Right, so when we look at, per capita is going to be way off the chart, because I think we're one of these communities that have more activity than just what our population depicts,
Right.
not unlike my old agency. So I think you have to look at it a little differently when we look at what those calls for service entail because of our business community.
For context, that's 13.6 calls a day.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And you'll see then too what our major crime looks like in comparison to, and then what our staffing, how the staffing numbers play into that. So our Part 1 offenses, as I mentioned, I thought this was a significant change, and I think something that certainly will get fleshed out in the annual report, but just to kind of show you where some of that came from is that our thefts doubled from 31 to 62 that fall into that, and these are felony thefts, which is the Part 1 offenses. So these are all felony rated offenses, and our aggravated assault or batteries went from 2 to 7 in 1 year. So that's kind of where some of that 32 comes from on some of our increase in calls. But you can see where these, to get to Trustee Mahoney's part about COVID, everybody's numbers were obviously artificially depressed because of the either closings, along with this agency as well as law enforcement across the country really kind of shut down, not shut down, but weren't as proactive as they were. I'm sure you saw that the level of traffic enforcement dropped because we were basically telling our officers not to stop cars unless it was an emergency or a significant safety, because at that point we didn't know if people were going to die just based on interacting with other people. So a lot of those things were very different in 20.
You mentioned the majority of those Part 1 offenses are theft. I'm trying to think back to reading your biweekly reports, and the most common one seems to be auto theft. Would you agree with that?
Well, motor vehicle theft is actually counted separately in the Part 1s, and they've been So I can tell you that in 20, there were 18, and in 21, there were 29, and in 22, there were 27.
Okay.
So kind of consistent for the last 2 years as far as motor vehicle thefts. A lot of that does revert to the truck issues too.
Right.
So our Part 2 offenses are fairly stable for the most part over the last 3 years. And these, our Part 2 offenses, again, they're the simple assault, simple battery, the misdemeanor criminal damage, disorderly conduct, those kind of things that are lower level but still obviously take a significant amount of time from our people. Our service call history, now this is also interesting. Service calls I break down to be alarm calls, animal complaints, assist ambulance calls, assist fire, suspicious auto, parking issues, those kind of things. So the service calls that aren't necessarily related to a criminal incident, but are nonetheless calls for service that our people have to respond to. And still that there was a impact. And very interestingly, I met with the fire chief last week, and we had a conversation that actually they're seeing their busiest year they've ever had as an agency. So obviously the more calls they get, the more calls we get to assist them. And just to show you that our assist ambulance calls went from 83 in 21 to 104 in 2022. And that's that we don't go to all of them anymore. Just to show you as an example, in 2018 we had 228 assist ambulance calls. So some of those low-level ambulance calls that we've actually not responded to, where they don't require our assistance or isn't in a public place or there isn't some type of either criminal incident, narcotics, something like that, they would require us to respond to it too. Otherwise, it would be that much greater.
So between 19 and 20 there, we had a pretty significant drop, 1,299, looks like calls down to 824.
Right.
That I would guess could be attributed to the lockdown. It's been fairly steady since. Do you think now that the whole COVID protocol is coming to an end, as of I think June 1st this year, would you anticipate that going back up to the 1,000, 1,200
I think
level?
that's a very reasonable thing, that we're seeing an uptick, and certainly when we have 50 in 1 year, I think we're going to start to see that exponentially continue to increase. Our false alarms, this is always an interesting, and you can see there very, very definitely about a COVID effect.
Yeah.
And this is something that you always want to keep an eye on, because obviously false alarms require a police response that could put our officers in danger for no reason. These are actual ones that aren't bona fide then, obviously. And whether or not people are taking care of it, taking care of their systems, and whether or not, looking at this, and if it continues to increase, whether or not we need to come back to the board and look at our false alarm ordinance and see if it needs to be strengthened at all to try to reduce some of those calls for service.
Well, it takes officers away from other potential issues. That might be out
Absolutely.
there. Yeah.
I know that in one case, we did have a very big repeat offender out, and I talked with the owner of the company. A lot of ordinances will even allow me to have the authority to stop responding if they refuse to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And there really isn't a section in our ordinance that allows for that. So I just had asked him to strongly consider making some operational changes to stop this from happening, and also he needed to pay his bills too. What he owed
And
us.
how is that going?
Well, I think we've only had one in the last couple of months from there, so a little better.
Okay.
So he had to change some operational things, and he had, I think, temporary staff that was coming in every morning, and they didn't know how to shut off the alarm. And finally, I think he set it so it automatically is on a timer, so it shuts off before they get there, so it won't trigger it, and things like that. They're just simple things to help us. Total traffic crashes, again, a little bit of a drop, but you're starting to see an increase come back to that. I think that this breaks it down a little further, so that way you can see fatal. Obviously, where the significant fatal that we had on 72 in 2022. But then personal injury accidents, 31 for this past year, and then 259 property damage only accidents. So you can see that our physical or personal injury accidents are fairly stable. Fatals, 1 to less than 1 a year is pretty consistent, even though we have some very significant, pretty big intersections. And they can have some very traumatic events occur. But you can see that our property damage only that is starting to increase, and certainly with the amount of traffic that we're starting to see increase too. Citations, now this is one thing, that we always look at. It's somewhat, you can talk about whether or not it's a productivity issue, but quite frankly, what we're seeing here, obviously there was an increase last year over compared to 21, but maybe not as much as we had several years ago. And I think part of that has to do with staffing, available time, and of course citations are issued when officers aren't on calls and in other words, otherwise committed, and what their percentage of committed versus uncommitted time is they're working, and what our minimum staffing looks like on a given day. So I think that feeds into some of this, as we've seen our call load increase, and obviously they have less uncommitted time to be able to do more traffic patrol.
Can you talk a little bit about the parking? What is the characteristics of the parking citations that you're...
Most of that, I think, is overnight for the most part. There'd be handicap too and some of that stuff.
Okay.
Our DUI arrests have been, and I think this goes part with some of the things we've seen with staffing, and just so you're aware, a typical DUI arrest could potentially usually take 2 officers and could be 2 to 3 hours. So, sometimes there is discretion used when you can, and I don't mean let people leave, but depending on what other call load is like, if it's very busy or we're at minimum staffing, and whether or not there's other avenues to use when we can. But obviously, it's been a little consistent for the last couple of years, but a little less than what we saw in 2018. And that's pretty regional, those numbers too. And a lot of that has to do with the advent of Uber and Lyft has changed this significantly too for most agencies in the region.
I mean, any DUI arrest is too many, but do these numbers concern you?
It's not what I wouldn't expect. So, I think anywhere from, even the average of 1 a week, I think I don't say it's okay like it's okay,
Right. No,
but
I
the expectation would be there.
But not like excessive or anything.
No.
We need to...
Considering the amount of liquor licenses we have,
that's
probably not bad.
Okay.
So just to give you some comparison, and this is the only reason I bring this up so that way it helps give you some framework on, well, what does that all mean? So at this point, after that you authorized the 2 additional full-time officers, our calls for services compared to West Dundee's, and then their Part 1 offenses compared to our Part 1 offenses, and then what the amount of staffing that they have for basically the same amount of activity. Now, what's interesting is you look at that and then see what the workload looks like. So our workload, that I was able to compute, basically we have 14 FTEs even with our part-time staff, because our part-time staff worked combined 2,100 hours, which is basically one full-time equivalent. And the 2 officers that you authorized being in May of 1 really didn't come online until the end of this calendar year, by the time training, hiring, and so forth. Matter of fact, the second officer wasn't released to solo patrol until the 2nd week of January. So he wasn't realized at all throughout 22. So if you look at that in comparison, and look at the workload, is the difference of what our people are doing at 356 calls per FTE as compared to West Dundee's 235 calls per FTE is fairly significant. Now, nobody's saying anybody's overworked, but what it does show is the amount, again, of unobligated versus obligated time, which is what we call in our manpower allocation in regards to, that means there that much less time for preventative patrol and to be visible in the neighborhoods if they're committed to calls.
And this just shows that we're better.
Well, there you go.
We're winning.
I won't disagree with you when it comes to our people.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Do you have any idea, and I know on average is a very broad statement when you're talking about the different types of calls, but on average we saw how many calls a day, but how long does a call take?
So there's a rule of thumb that Northwestern uses when they do these manpower allocation studies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a felony, those part ones could be an average of 2 to 3 hours, but you know, there could be some where we've had some major incidents that could be 4 people, 8 hours each. You know,
Right.
so that's very rough estimate. You know, a typical crash, property damage crash, may be an hour of obligated time. A PI injury crash could be 2 hours. A DUI arrest, like I said, could be 2 to 3 hours alone. Or if you factor in a DUI accident or somebody that needs to have blood drawn at Sherman, now you've lost somebody for 3 hours, you know, for sure. So it's kind of, you know, you can use a formula that Northwestern teaches to try to come up with this, to see what your optimum staffing look like. And part of that is depending on what the board would suggest is what you reasonably want to see, that ratio of obligated to unobligated time.
Right.
Do you want 30 minutes of every 60 to be on patrol? Do you want 45? Do you want 15? You know, and that's kind of the ratios that you use to see what, you know, what a particular municipal government wants to see in their level of service.
Thank you.
So again, just the major incidents is the major traffic crash, double fatal that we had. Actually, that's the Wendy's, pardon me, into the restaurant right before I got here, and there was a major incident. We know about the aggravated battery to firearm at one of our establishments. And then the double fatal on Route 72, and then we also had the aggravated discharge of firearm. All those incidents create a significant amount of time commitment, of course, for our people, and then you factor in the number of people we had available. It makes it sometimes challenging, but certainly our people have done a great job. But this is just a case of, you know, it's continuing, and as the community continues to be successful and is doing a wonderful job of attracting new ventures, that of course just continues to put some pressures on service, depending on, you know, no one event or no one new development creates an issue. It's whether or not you do a half a dozen of them, and now we've changed the dynamics of what we're able to provide.
So what about that aggravated battery with a firearm? I remember we knew who that was, but I never got a report that we found him.
No, there's a warrant for the person's arrest. We believe he's fled out of state, and there's still a national warrant for the individual. So our people did a great job in the investigation, and we got the warrant. It took a couple weeks for the state's attorney to approve it after our people did all the follow-up work, but the person's still at large.
Is there a statute of limitation on that crime?
Not an act.
I have a question that maybe goes into the annual report that you're working on, but do you have any ideas on what is the difference between us and West Dundee, that they have double the residents and more businesses, but we have the same number? Like, when you look at them broken down by types of calls and service calls or hours of the night, are there patterns that could help us identify which areas are maybe overly inflated that we could look at?
Well, I know that we've done some work on, you know, just what our incidents look like when it comes to fights, disturbances, batteries, which go into our business, that have been highly successful. But we'll run between 75 and 100 fights or disturbance calls per year. So that's part of it, because I think we have a more robust business district, I think, than they do at the present time, considering the mall's current state.
Yeah, more people are
where
coming here at
West Dundee
night.
used to outpace us because of the mall, but obviously times have changed significantly. And then we do get a lot of activity out on the east side with all the trucks and some of the incidents that occur out there, and thefts, civil disputes, and then trying to run them down and investigate whether or not they were actually a stolen, or whether or not it's a civil issue, or whether or not it's a handshake lease rental agreement without paperwork with drivers, and there's our people do a lot of work out there.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, thank you. This is the first time we've ever,
Thank you, Chief.
in my involvement, we've ever had a report like this, so it's really enlightening. And kind of put some context around the biweekly reports that we get from you, so thank you.
And I tried to be as open as the board's really, aware of the types of incidents our people go through.
Yeah, great.
Okay, any other questions? Chief, Deputy Chief, no? Good. Okay, that'll take us to item D if we could have a motion. Well, actually, this is a discussion for the Gypsy Month. So, discussion of the proposal from Hendrickson Flying Service Incorporated for aerial treatments associated with the eradication of spongy moth caterpillars, and provides staff with direction regarding whether to proceed with coordinating aerial treatments in the spring of '23. Phil, why don't you take it?
Good evening.
Okay.
So in front of you this evening is a proposal from Hendrickson Tree Flying Service to conduct an aerial treatment of potentially two areas of the community. As you've seen in their proposal, there are one smaller area and one larger area. And as you've seen some of our residents, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and how the spongy moth has affected their properties and their trees, took the opportunity to essentially solicit two treatment options. One is more targeted to the areas of known infestations, and then took another opportunity to expand it a little bit and more of a village-wide coverage. The treatment would be conducted via helicopter. It would be in two phases. So the first treatment would be late April, early May at some point. In fact, I talked to the city of Park Ridge. Their treatment last year didn't occur until the first week in June. But sometime late April into May would be the first treatment, followed by a second treatment 7 to 14 days after that. It would essentially, is the information provided to you from not only my memo, but also from the Department of Agriculture. They provided some little additional information about the product that would be sprayed. The BTK, which is a naturally occurring bacteria in the soil, and so that would target the caterpillar phase or stage of the spongy moth, and they would ingest it and essentially kill the caterpillar. The treatment itself would occur in the early morning hours, likely, each treatment, so it would be essentially one spray event and then followed by one spray event 7 to 14 days after the fact, after that. So, if you authorize this treatment, what we would do is there would be a public notice requirement, so we would put together a little public information campaign to notify the entire community. The flying service would then develop a flight plan and then provide that to the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and then they would review it and then approve it ultimately, and then back to us for a flight, scheduling a flight program. So, what else?
Do Hendrickson, do they provide any sort of guarantee of effectiveness, or is it just a crapshoot?
They do not. They do not. However, in talking with the city of Park Ridge, their forester, he did indicate that although their treatment area was 80 acres compared to our broader area, which would be, I think the smaller area is 394 acres, they had very little feeding subsequent to the two treatments that they experienced. And what's interesting there is their treatment area was almost exclusively forest preserve area. They didn't treat any residential areas, but they are considering that this year. And in talking to the Flight Service, they did mention that in some cases, some towns have come back to do a second treatment a year later if feeding did occur subsequent to the first series of treatments, year one.
Do we know if Hendrickson offers, I mean, it seems to me that if we're going to go ahead and disperse this agent into the air with a, helicopter, would it be more effective and more targeted if we were to use like a drone? Would they have anything like that that could like localize the application to a tree rather than, a broad-based, disbursement? It might, if you take into account wind, the effectiveness may be diminished. I don't know.
That I don't know. I don't know if that's, I think the best treatment in my professional opinion, based on the information and talking with a number of different people, would be more of a blanket application, because it's hard to know where these caterpillars and ultimately the male moths, when they fly, have the extent of their reach. In fact, every trap, as I mentioned in my memo, every trap that we set out in Public Works collected moths throughout the Lakewood Estates and Terrace neighborhoods.
And I'm just wondering if, we can go, I'm just wondering if any of this is going to come to any effect if we're going to go ahead and treat East Dundee, but the moths go over to Carpentersville or West Dundee and they're coming here. So, if surrounding communities were to get involved and kind of band together, it'd certainly be more effective, probably more cost effective as well. But has any communication with, say, Carpentersville to the north been done?
I attempted to reach out to both communities and didn't get a response back from either.
Okay.
Did talk to the folks at the Dundee Township, and they didn't indicate that there was any concern on their part of the spongy moth on their properties. Sounds like at this point we're
This
on our own.
neighborhood is the next street over is Carpentersville.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, just to the north is
Well,
Seaville.
and actually, there's a big area that is township, which my house backs up to, and my 18 trees on my, oak trees on my property, that has, over the past 20 years, 60 acres of it between the terrace and between this neighborhood where these neighbors are coming from, where they have spent, volunteers have spent countless hours eradicating all invasive species to save the oak trees. So if you didn't notice them, it's maybe because you weren't looking, is my kind of, I can tell you they affected both the backyard, and I can probably see about 60 other oak trees from my backyard over in the open space. So to say they just stopped at the property line,
And in speaking with the Department of Agriculture, they are throughout the region. In northern Illinois, of course, Park Ridge, Oak Park, other towns.
Beyond the Midwest? Do we know?
Yes. There's the Department of Agriculture and some of the spongy moth organizations have developed maps kind of showing nationally the effect of the moth itself.
Those egg sacs that they showed the pictures on, if the moths aren't able to get above the burlap, would that localize or kind of tend to limit where they're going to lay their eggs? Or would they go higher up? If they can't get beyond the burlap, wouldn't the egg formulation
They do migrate up and down the tree.
Well, they can, sure.
There's a distinction. It's the moths that lay the eggs. So the caterpillars become moths. So we're trying to keep caterpillars from becoming moths. But once the guys fly and the girls walk,
they're going to plant
they get
wherever.
together
That's
any place they want. And then she walks to where she will lay her eggs.
Okay. So she should be
high
able
as
to,
she wants
easy to
go.
catch, right? She should be easy to catch. No?
Thank you. Maybe some of the extra
You're welcome
police
over anytime.
officers.
No, I'm okay.
Yeah, but that's the distinction. It's the eggs come from the flying creatures. Or the,
So I'm wondering if we could get Carpentersville in on this, along maybe with West Dundee. Have we had, by the way, I wanted to ask, has there been any other areas of the town that have been affected beyond Lakewood Estates?
Lakewood and Terracing down, not to my knowledge. I haven't seen
heard
any
any, so I
evidence
don't
of
know.
it south of 72 or in the flats or in the downtown area. That's
No.
not to say that they're not there already, or could be
Never
there
know,
this year,
right.
but
We don't have as many.
I
And
personally
when-
have not witnessed
And
it.
when you look at the rest of the village east of 25, it's all industrial parks and gravel
That's
grinding.
true. Right,
So there's not
yeah.
there's not the tree cover and the tree canopy that there is
Yeah.
once you get east of 25. Maybe a little bit further south, over there.
Well, this map showing what I assume is the treatment areas shows it in the Lions Park area as well.
Mhm.
Which map, I'm sorry, Trustee Quincy?
Lions Park.
The
Oh, this-
map of
this
treatment
here?
option 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, the smaller map.
Oh, I'm sorry, of the proposed,
Proposed spraying area.
Is that what those dots are? Is
Has the
proposed
Park
area?
District been involved in any of the discussion?
Yeah,
so
it's in
I
the
talked to
packet.
Dundee Township, yes, I had communicated with their open lands group, and communicated, and they indicated that they don't have any concerns at this
Well,
point.
the Park District may be part of the township, they're usually kind of a separate
Yeah,
unit
they are.
altogether, management-wise, so.
Mhm.
Hey Phil, I see a
Yes.
map of treatment option 1 in
Yes.
here. Is treatment option 2 in
It's
here?
further down.
Oh.
You know, I took it out of my memo, but it is in their proposal.
Mhm. It's in their
Oh.
proposal.
I didn't go there. Here we go.
Oh,
Sorry,
it's
thank
dots
you.
now. It's a different-
Yeah, I focused in my memo on treatment option area 1 with the 2
This
areas
is the
were
area
with
where
no
the open spaces,
infestations.
that's the township.
Once if we blow all around
Yeah.
it. Is there, okay, so honestly, I'm looking at Library Springs because, and I know it's not our purview and I know it's not where we'd go, but,
East Dundee houses back up to it.
yeah, so
And
so I'm just looking at treatment, well, I guess both of the treatment options would pretty much spray almost completely around it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure
Which
there's
is-
none in there.
you're anticipating what my suggestion would be.
Well, yeah, I don't know if we can spray over it without them being
Just get an
notified.
oh, we can't do that, no.
No.
But get an, whatever intergovernmental agreement or permission to be able to do that.
I don't know. Okay. Thank you. I just,
And
didn't-
they
I
would-
needed to see the other map.
And I think any type of public information campaign would also have to include their
Mm-hmm.
affected
Yeah,
businesses or residents
right.
or park properties.
right. Cool. I had done some research as well. I wanted to just put some different context around some of this as well. I had a lot of the same experiences that my neighbors had and once I was notified, I looked up into my tree canopy and there wasn't one there in certain large branches anymore. It was just the bare branches. So it definitely alarming and concerning. We also do a lot with our treatment and fertilization of some of the oaks is when they get when they have the oak wilt or the other kind of things that affect oaks, just to keep them as healthy as possible. Even before this infestation, there was a huge infestation in pine wilt, and all of our pine trees in the area have gone. Now, granted, pines are fast growing, you don't, and you cut them down or whatever, but we lost probably 80 pines on our property that line our property. They're lodgepole pines, so it affects our property value, but it wasn't like the oak trees, okay? That are more slow growing than that. So our neighborhood has already changed. And I know there's other people in the village who's also, not just in our neighborhood, but in other areas who've lost a lot of pine trees to that. I see somebody else nodding here. Hi, Shanna. What I wanted to just remind everybody that East Dundee was awarded the Tree City designation for the last, how many years, Phil? 3, 4 years?
4, maybe even 5.
4 years. And part of that designation is because of the program that we put together to give supply trees for the what's that area called in between the sidewalk and the road? Parkway, thank you. And is there any other reasons for that, the Tree City designation?
Tree City USA is recognizing communities that have tree care programs to support, maintain, and foster their urban forests. And so it's based on plantings, removals, trimming, dollars per capita.
Yeah, and you guys have spent a lot, I know, with storm cleanups and that kind of thing as well. So, you know, when we think of infrastructure as a village, we normally think of gray infrastructure, right? Gray infrastructure being, and we spend about 19% of our annual budget in 2022 on our gray infrastructure. All right, that is the sewer service, water supplies, road maintenance, trees, and the tree canopy are what's called a green infrastructure, and is just as important as our gray infrastructure to the health and welfare of the village and our residents. So, as I believe Mrs. Beltry explained, that you know, the tree canopy does a lot for our stormwater supply, and maintenance and dispersing stormwater, soil, which comes along with that soil conservation. And we live in a hilly, we're not, you know, just flatlanders like some people in Wisconsin might want us to think that we are. And it improves the air quality, carbon storage, sequestration of the heat islands that happen when there aren't that canopy, which is more global warming. Little bits make a difference. So, and also the largest trees that we have are going to bring the biggest benefits to the community and to that ecosystem. And if they're lost, it's going to be the biggest loss to the ecosystem. So I was talking about what we spend in the village budget on our gray infrastructure, and I have that kind of broken down. For a treatment of the 55K against the $3,628,000 that we spend on gray infrastructure, I think this is while it's a big number, it's a big bill. It's also 1.5% of what just of our 19% that we spend on our gray infrastructure. So as you can probably anticipate, I'm in favor of moving forward with it, and because of the layout of East Dundee and the township open space, I would like to get permission from them to at least fly over the area so that there is a consistent, and it will also, to cover both the areas between Lakewood Estates and the Terrace and the rest of the village, so that we can comprehensively handle this, because you can't treat it like the Dutch elms where you inoculate the ground or the roots. It has to be a comprehensive blanket. That's all I have.
I would wonder, Phil, if we've talked to the county at all, would they have funding available for either a test area, or how much the county has addressed this issue to the state, to this point rather, how much they've spent on it, and if they would be willing to provide some grant money either through the Department of Natural Resources or the Forest Preserve, and then the same would hold with the state, because I would think that there'd be grant money available for this. And so now I know if they're, every community is going to have their hand out looking for this kind of help, but if they haven't really done a whole lot to tackle this problem to date, they may be willing to, I don't know, use us as a test subject, if you will.
So it says in the packet that the Illinois Department of Agriculture indicated that since the infestations mostly present in East Dundee are, what is it? That since established populations infestations of spongy moth have been present in East Dundee area for over 20 years, village is required to manage its own populations.
Okay, well,
Well,
that's good.
You know, I mean, since this came about, you know, I've been trying to see if we can get other communities, and if we can't get it, at least I think this year is critical to at least get started. We might have to do it again next year, and at that time, we can show proof of concept that this, you know, does work. There is some return on the investment, so that we can say, guys, we took the big load here.
True.
I want you guys to do it at least in this area, or at least get your traps out next year, so you can have a count. So we can have a more comprehensive idea of what the problem is and how is it. It's not localized.
No, and
I
while
can tell you.
we would hope that, and we would expect, frankly, other communities surrounding us to cooperate, we can't compel them to do that. We also can't get, and I'm not suggesting that we don't do something. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. We can't get Hendrickson to guarantee any effect of what they do. The disbursement in a helicopter, if you take into account wind, is likely to blow probably 30 or 40% of it to little effect.
Well,
You know, it's
I think
waste.
they probably
So-
check the weather report and do it on.
If in
day
addition
without
to
a lot
that,
of
Yeah,
wind.
I think they probably know.
Weather is a significant.
no, I'm sure they'll
Yeah.
probably
time.
apply the application and do that kind of thing at the best time of the day or month or whatever. But at the same time, if this is a situation in our packet that Sarah just brought up has existed in East Dundee for some years, you know, all of a sudden now we're seeing a lot of them. I get it, but you know, we saw a lot of the emerald ash borer a few years back too. That was an issue. We tried to treat trees, and a lot of communities just went ahead and said, cut them all down, at least in parkways. Well, when we're talking about oaks, we really don't have that kind of option. But
So are we
I would
looking
just
at
like to-
option 1 or option 2? Is that what we're thinking?
I would like option 2 with the flyover, including that area of the Dundee Township, Library Springs, if we can get permission from the township to do that.
So option 1 is smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
well, how big an area is the Library Springs that we're
68
talking
acres.
about? So we're going to end up paying for the township's portion of that. That's my point. And then we're going to end up paying for what essentially is Carpentersville's problem coming south into East Dundee. And I mean, it's going to be like throwing
So
sand
should we
against the
only do
pipe.
your neighborhood?
No, I'm just
You know?
saying that this is what we need to
Yeah.
consider, all the other aspects of this. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do something.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is that we need to understand all the factors that are involved that might be working against us and maybe head that off a little bit. So, you know, like I say, if there was I think a more accurate way of dispersing this kind of thing than just spreading it out through a helicopter, you know, I mean,
Is this the
really, you
national
have to ask
standard?
yourself how effective it is, and if Hendrickson won't back it, you know, there's a reason.
Phil, is this the national standard for treatment?
It has proven to be the most effective means of
Thank you.
addressing spongy moth.
Do we know to what extent?
in speaking with the forester with the City of Park Ridge, he did indicate that after they treated a total of 80 acres last year, of which 10 was kind of considered the hot spot. And he said that they observed very little to no feeding subsequent to the treatment. So based on that, to me,
That's effective.
is a-
It's effective.
seems to have a pretty strong impact on.
Maurice?
I don't want to muddy the water, because I think, approval is what's necessary, and then you figure out how to
Pay for it.
extract something from the neighbors. The awareness thing has, we are aware now, right? But they're not. A lady just showed me a picture. She walked down by the river. She has egg masses on trees now, but they're not in this because, if they didn't report and Phil didn't add them to their list and didn't put a trap there, we don't see them. But I'm not wanting to cloud it beyond this after the approval. I've observed this today. If an egg mass moves, the moths move slowly, but you take a stick of wood out of my yard with an egg mass on it and move it across the street or to Library Springs, and all of a sudden there's 100,000 things coming out. Red oak was working in Carpentersville today, and they took down 3 oak trees, and I was driving by and thinking, where's that stuff going? And so beyond this, I'm just saying there's another big step to maybe people can't just cut down trees in places without some sort of permit, where we know whether it's an infected tree certain times of year, because the egg masses will all hatch in about 2 months, right? Then it doesn't matter. But right now, if that stuff's moved, it can cause another infestation. And it needs to be on the plan this summer, next fall, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
So phase 2 was, what was it, 55 grand?
I'm sorry?
Phase 2 was 55?
Option
2 rather?
52,000.
Correct. There's a little bit of a lower unit price for a larger area, economy of scale, and so that total treatment cost would be approximately 52,000. For the area, that would include flats downtown and an area south of 72.
Flats, downtown, it would be the Lakewood Estates that are now, obviously.
Yes.
And then what, you said the reserves? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be pretty much the
The
whole.
triangle
It would
area.
be pretty much the whole
Town?
town, yep.
So,
Almost all of our residential areas would be included in that option number 2.
so then it's just a matter, I mean, if we're getting a reduced rate for doing more, conceivably, if we could get some agreement with neighboring areas, then we can get even a lower rate.
That's my point.
What about the timing?
The what?
The timing, the FAA flight plan, getting in their budgets.
Well, we'd have to, yeah,
They may have missed it for this year.
well, true.
If
There
they're-
may be some sort of emergency procedure that they could get on their horse and get it done really quick, but who knows?
I talked to
But that's-
Hendrickson this morning, and I indicated that if we're having a discussion this evening, and if we needed to bring this back on the 20th, and if I gave them the official okay on the 21st, they would be fine with that. So I have a little time to continue working with some of our neighboring organizations, including the township and so on, to see what additional participation, or any really participation at this point in those areas may not occur.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
would vote
think
in favor of 2, but in the meantime, would hope that we can get some more people on so that we can spread or reduce costs if possible, but there's a sense of urgency with these trees and all these neighborhoods that it makes sense to treat them now instead of waiting another year.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if we tell them on the 21st that, I mean, that they're okay to do it, they're not gonna do it for a few months. So,
Well,
It's done in early May.
Yeah.
As soon as the leaves are up.
They would begin developing the flight plan almost immediately, and then submit that to the FAA for their review and the subsequent approval, and then ready to go. The treatment would be subject to moth and leaf development, so depending upon the kind of a spring we ultimately get, whether if we get warmer conditions, spring type weather, we may see leaf development foliage earlier, sooner, which may expedite the development of the caterpillar. Or growth of the caterpillar.
So I assume this is like a very fine powder type of dust, not a heavy particulate?
It's my understanding, that's
matter.
correct. And in fact, the Department of Agriculture's little two-page summary that's in your packet talks a little bit about the product and the fact that they flat out indicate that we've probably been exposed to it in our daily lives, all of us, on varying levels,
Yeah.
consuming produce.
Agent Orange. So, okay, well, do we have a consensus then? We want to move forward with exploring this then?
I think I got a sense from,
Option 2.
Option 2.
Yeah, option 2 all the way around.
Yeah, I'm good with option 2. I mean, if we're gonna do it, we should do option 2. I think,
Yeah.
For sure, for the slight cost difference, you know, and more effective treatment, seems like a no-brainer.
You know, that this vendor includes the second treatment a few days later is really exceptional. You know, that may address some of the inaccuracy of weather and everything.
But yeah, because you never know how it's gonna,
The leaves have to be out so that they can receive the dust, if you will, and then the caterpillars have to be alive to start to eat it. So those are the two things that have to come together.
okay.
But that's almost a guarantee if you want to think of it that way.
Yes.
Can I say one thing about Hendrickson? I had my first conversation a year ago with the lady from the Department of Agriculture. They stayed on Nancy Johnson, and she's out in Rockford. And she knew this area very well, been in touch with Phil, put me in touch with Phil. Hendrickson is the recommended for the state of Illinois sprayer, and so I think they're very reputable. I don't think they would have that kind of reputation if it wasn't effective, if they weren't responsive. So I don't know if you looked at others, but this was the one that came recommended from the state that does all the areas.
It's their core business.
Yeah, that's all they do.
They're sprayers.
Okay.
So I think
Agriculture.
from a company standpoint, you're probably working with the best we can possibly get.
And that's how I found out about them through
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson.
Doing anything that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
One quick comment, you asked for effectiveness.
Yeah.
We did the Indiana Extension Service. BTK treatments are 80 to 85% of the caterpillars are killed after 2 consecutive sprays, approximately 99% are caterpillar.
Let's hope, yeah, it's promising. So, cool.
So what I'll do is I'll prepare ahead of the next March 20th meeting, proceeding with option 2, and I'll reach out to some of these other
Yeah, and
organizations to
just like
solicit their,
communication
one more time.
would,
push it up a little bit
like,
harder.
people need to cover
Last
swimming
call
pools
for
or something
BTK.
like that. We need to put the word out, let know that these helicopters are gonna go up above, you know, and, you know, when they go over your house, hold your breath for a few minutes and then let them pass, so.
Well, it's my understanding it'll be in the early morning hours, so my
Okay.
guess is most people will be in bed or
Yeah, all right.
not out of the house yet.
It's not toxic though, interestingly enough.
Well, yeah, that's what I was wondering too, you know, pets, kids, swimming
Pets.
pools, who knows?
Allergies.
Yeah, right.
It just tends to be kind of neutral.
Okay.
Thank you, Phil.
All right, great.
And it's not new, it's
Just
not
came
like
up.
they're experimenting on Dundee. It's what's used nationwide.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What's that? Oh. All right, great. Well, and then
Thank you.
we've got our direction done. Roll call.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then that's gonna take us to
You don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting if you don't
item
want to.
E.
You
Yeah,
understand.
we're gonna
Yeah.
wrap up soon, so
Okay,
we could have a motion for item E.
I'll make a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing abatement of the tax levy for general obligation bond 2012A, general obligation bond 2012B, 2012 TIF revenue bonds, Route 25 TIF, and general obligation 2015 and general obligation 2016 for the Village of East Dundee, Kane, and Cook Counties, Illinois. Sorry I yelled through the alphabet.
Second.
Second, if you don't have one.
Okay, this one is just our annual long-term debt maintenance, if you will. I mean, we do this every year, correct? So since the county kind of dictates where the money's coming from and if it's available, any monies that we're
laid aside from property taxes to make up for it are not needed, we made it back. So is that essentially the gist of it? I mean, so if we were to keep this money though and lay it off on future payments, we technically could pay down these obligations faster, correct?
Correct.
There's a thought. Future discussion.
Yeah.
So, okay, are there any questions then about this? This is not really a housekeeping item, but it is tax related, so, and we see this on an annual basis.
Yep.
So, do you?
No questions.
Okay. No questions. Catherine?
Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
And Trustee Coonsey?
Yes.
Okay, item F, this is a motion I would like to ask to be tabled. We have recently just
I'll
learned
make
that.
a motion to table.
Okay, we got a better price coming along the line, so
Second.
we're gonna explore that. So, okay. Catherine?
Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
And Trustee Coonsey?
Great. We'll
Yes.
probably see that one in another 2 weeks, hopefully then. That takes us to our village reports. Let's go ahead and start with Andy.
No report.
Okay, Rich.
No report.
Scott?
I have two things. First off, I had a text from a resident asking about, we had a water main break and we left a note on the door. And they just mentioned, we used to have like a village-wide text system, and it seems like we don't use it. And
Alert.
they thought, why not use that for these water main breaks? Because a lot of times people aren't at their front door, going through their front door at the time. They might just be in bed or in their house, and they don't go to the front door. They're just inside, and they might not get that message about the water boil. And it seems like a decent idea, actually. I thought, but I don't know what happened to that system. Is it still in effect?
What closet is it in?
Yeah. How does it work?
Well, I do remember, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You have to opt in because the village can't just send texts. So each individual resident has to opt in, register their phone number. I know there were some residents that said, I don't want to hear from the village ever, no matter what the situation is. But, it takes two.
Sure.
But is it active, that for water main breaks?
I'm not aware of the software, so I will confer with staff and see if we have it.
So this is a concern that I've had since I've been here, that we don't have a communication or community notification system at present. I've been tasked to chair a subcommittee with Quadcom, looking at it from both our perspective individually as a village and the economies of scale of doing it Quadcom wide, but then having our own separate accounts that could be used for emergency notification, boil orders, things like that, parking for downtown, and also have subgroups, which I'm very interested in. If there was an emergency and I need to do an all call, I really can't have the Quadcom dispatchers trying to make 20 phone calls in the middle of the crisis. So to be able to have that also for us as a village, so the department heads or if the village administrator, it's an emergency or we have to activate an EOC or something like that. So we don't currently have anything that I'm aware of since I've been here, because I've been asking that same question.
Okay.
But am exploring a few separate different organizations and companies and hoping that there could be, because it's based on population is the cost. So obviously the cost for us with our residential population, no matter how big the town is, gets to be a little more expensive per resident, where if I can spread it over 70,000 people, Quadcom wide, that we reduce our costs significantly.
Eric and I sat in actually in a meeting with a vendor with a pretty slick app that allowed for communications of all aspects. Everything you need to know about East Dundee, when and where, was basically on your phone. It was a very slick tool that he had. And I have since received at least 4 more from other companies coming up with similar systems like the one we sat in on. This one, of course, handles
things that are beyond just simple text communications to the residents, but we may want to explore that again. So.
Yeah, and Erica, if there is one just hiding out in a closet somewhere, we can dust it off. But if we don't actually have one, as Chief has discovered, then
I'll see what I can dig up, and if we don't have one, I will look into options.
Awesome, thank you.
Are you done?
No, actually, one other thing. I was thinking, Brandis sent me that mid-year report that we got last week, and I was just thinking, we've got this cash balance that's excess of $7 million, and it's collected us a nice chunk of interest, which is awesome. But I'm just wondering, we've got this police fund that's, behind. I'm wondering if we're gonna do our extra payment from our general fund this year to catch up to the recommended amount. I don't remember what that was. I think it was 300, 200, 300, 400. Okay. Would we be interested in then maybe also taking from that cash balance and putting a substantial deposit into our police pension fund from that, in addition to that? I mean, either way, it's our money. We're still keeping it. We're not throwing it away or spending it or anything like that. It's just collecting interest in a different account than that, which would, doing that now, would reduce the need in the future to increase taxes. So, I don't know. I think I would like to at least have a discussion about it as a board, maybe in the next meeting, to talk about it.
But we got a budget meeting coming up too, so we can discuss that. Right?
Yeah, I think it's worth at least exploring
What
the
that would
option.
look like.
Okay.
Is that it?
That's it.
Kathleen?
Yes. Well, I can't believe nobody said anything yet.
Parade.
The 11th. We are going to be wearing the green and having our St. Patrick's Day festivities all of the Saturday. The parade that'll come through town. Does anybody know what the weather is going to be like?
38 degrees.
Oh.
Sorry.
And so there's a lot of festivities going on. East Dundee the St. Pat's is or our website has all of the different events that are going on during the day. Let's be safe out there. And then on the 18th, we've got the fireworks on Saturday evening, which is always really fun. And then I'm gonna kind of rain on all this fun and just bring up the fact that a couple weeks ago there was a fairly. Now I feel weird characterizing it, but there was a bus accident on Bonnie Dundee. A bus had gone into one of the guardrails, and basically it was a convoy of buses in Lakewood Estates. Yep. It's the main drag down to the bus and to the schools. The street was pretty much closed down, for a couple hours, as the parents and everybody else came to pick up the kids that were in said buses that were in this. And so so I wanted, and I know Phil was doing a traffic study, because they were right in front of my house, doing that with the traffic counts. But I want to bring to everyone's attention that probably about 30 years ago, before profits and expediency and getting people to and from schools by private bus services, that the D300 school district did not allow buses up and down Bonnie Dundee because of the curviness, the drop-offs of the ravines, the elevation changes within it, and the fact there's no sidewalk, there's no shoulders, and it's so narrow you can't put a stripe down the middle of it. So, since that time, obviously we've changed over to a private bus service, into the schools. There's buses going up there, up and down there all the time.
Is it a shortcut route?
It's a shortcut route for commuters to get across the Carpentersville Bridge. And so this morning,
For buses, so it's not.
it is because there's no kids in our neighborhood that they're getting picked up. So there's other options, but this morning I was actually heading west on Bonnie Dundee because usually I just head out to go to work the other way. But I was heading west and I was literally in a train of 6 cars on my little road because the schools were dropping off and picking up. And so while I know we think that, you know, it's a quiet little area, it is a cut through to Carpentersville Bridge. It is the most direct route off of 25 to get to the middle school and the elementary schools that are there. And parents are harried. Did you know that?
Oh.
They're harried in the morning. They got to drop their kids off. So there's a lot of traffic and there's a lot of anxious, you know, and it's very well organized there. But it's a secondary road. It's not the little neighborhood road that some people might think of it as when they drive up and down. It's also a recreational road. And so there are in the summertime there are bikers, year round there are walkers. And so this is just my next build up to my next pitch on looking at the truck usage and the bus usage on that road, just for the safety and welfare of everyone in the community and in the area. And hey, potentially to build up, that as even more of a recreational road. So that's my update.
Good enough. Sarah?
Reiterating the parade, please be safe out there. Phil, do we have, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we're not going to have snow again this year. But do we, I said fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Can I bang on a piece of wood somewhere? The signs and all of that for the for parking, are those underway?
We have possession of the signs,
Okay.
so we're trying to find locations and going to locates and installing them for our signs. So it's going to be a little bit before they're all fully installed.
Okay. And then the messaging, Erica, I think we were going to post the signs and then sort of tell people about it and then start enforcing it, right?
Well, we put it in the newsletter last week. Franco put it on the website, so the word has been trickling out.
Okay.
And yeah, there's going to be only, reminders.
Yeah.
No enforcement until next
that's
winter
right.
season.
That's right. Thank you.
Good. Is that it?
That's it.
Kelly?
No report.
No report. Chris?
No report.
Joe?
No report.
Chief?
I think I said enough.
Phil?
There is a forecast of snow, unfortunately.
I said it.
They don't have any forecasted total yet,
It's
but
Friday, there's snow.
maybe-
We might dodge it.
Pardon?
We might dodge it. Who knows?
Well, last week.
Less than an
Unless
inch.
there's 6 inches, then that was
We got
none.
this. 3 inches on Thursday, though.
So-
Yeah, okay.
Never mind.
Brandis? Frank?
No report.
Okay, Erica?
No report.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry, just got noticed that we have water main break potentially on 135 King, so.
Oh.
To see.
We don't get them up there very often, do we? We just had one on the.
Well,
the
King
entrance
and
there.
Park. So it's
Oh,
got
King
the
and
word
Park.
out, so we're looking at it just shortly.
Seems like we've gotten a lot of them this year.
Up there, there's, yeah.
Well, last year or two, we've gotten a lot of them, pretty much.
Do we have a feeling as to why we're increasing our amount so much?
Aging infrastructure.
That's, I think some of the backfill surrounding some of our mains wasn't, the proper backfill wasn't utilized, so we have boulders and large rock material up against the, you can see it freezing, thaw, shifting. water main, the quality of the products, perhaps. Corrosive soil could be any number.
Okay. That leaves me, I just want to let everybody know that tomorrow is the League of Women Voters Candidates Forum in this room, 7 o'clock. Come one, come all. Meet your candidates, ask them questions, get to know what's going on. And the other thing is, I would like to just let everyone know that I am exercising the right to veto the board's motion in the last meeting concerning ordinance 23-08 and 23-09. I have a written order for that I will give to everybody, and so...
Can you interpret that into words?
What's that?
Can you interpret those numbers into words?
Well, if you'd like, I could read what I've written. That just pursuant to the veto powers afforded the village president of East Dundee, I'm exercising the right to veto the motions approved by the Village Board of Trustees at the meeting dated February 20th, 2023. The motions in question are the amendments to an ordinance that add a special use permit, ordinance 23-08, and an ordinance granting a special use permit, ordinance 23-09. The underlying support for this action is as follows. The above-mentioned ordinance 2308 violates the Village Code 157.150, which dictates parking requirements. The analysis conducted by the Village Building Department clearly indicates the number of parking spaces based on codified requirements to be 461 spaces. The parking lot at the River Valley Shopping Center currently has 394, leaving a deficit of 67 spaces. That's a problem. Section 157.050, general requirements, is vague as to the definition of retail use. Specifically, the new ordinance changes allow for general merchandise. A clearer, more restrictive definition needs to be provided. In other words, we need to determine and distinguish between resale and retail. The lack of detail surrounding offerings or allowable offerings could necessitate a less than desirable product offering. And for the above reasons, leading to the veto decision, the Planning and Zoning Commission and the public, through a public hearing, should be given the opportunity to review any changes to the village codes prior to the reissuance of the special permit and granting the permit. The response to this veto involves procedures that are documented and known to the board and should be followed accordingly. So, I will pass these out. You guys can have one for your use or review, and that's all I have. So, we'll continue. Let's see, one of those. Pass those down. One to Catherine and one to Kelly. Alrighty, so that's done with staff reports. Do we have an executive session?
Yes.
We do. So we're going to adjourn
Can I get a break?
into executive session. So thank you all for coming
We have to
in.
actually adjourn. Oh, sorry.
What are the reasons for the executive session?
Well, I was going to ask for a motion for it.
Litigation and approval of
yeah.
minutes, discussion of minutes.
Oh, discussion of minutes and litigation.
All right, I'll move to close to the public and media under the provisions of the Illinois Open Meeting Act, 5 ILCS 120/2, or C21, discussion of minutes, and C11, pending litigation, and we will adjourn from private session and not returning to public session.
Second.
Wonderful. Catherine?
Trustee Britton?
Yes.
Trustee Triber?
Yes.
Trustee Sauter?
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney?
Yes.
Trustee Coonsey?
Yes.
And President Lineham.
Yes. Thank you.